Everyone says Bella is in love with me. When we were young, boys came and went in her life, but every time I looked back, she was there behind me. Later, she gave up her carefree lifestyle for me, chose a stable life, and started learning how to cook and make a home. On my 26th birthday, she knelt down before me and pulled out a ring that symbolized true love. After a brief silence, I just said, "Bella, Calvin is dead." Bella turned pale in an instant. I looked at her calmly. I was surprised. "You still remember him?" I first met Bella when I was 7. I had my little backpack on, sitting at the bottom of the stairs, watching my mom argue loudly with someone. Initially, Mom was very polite, but back then, a divorced woman with a child was looked down upon, which meant she could be belittled and humiliated. It was clear the moving guy had this mindset. He thought he could take advantage of us and suddenly tried to add 30 more to the agreed price when we were about to settle the payment. Mom's face changed immediately, and she started arguing fiercely with the mover. People poked their heads out of the windows upstairs to watch the drama unfold. But Mom didn't care. She kept arguing. Up against a stronger man who made a living with his strength, she remained fearless and stood her ground. After about 10 minutes, the mover gave up. He took the money and cursed, "No wonder your man divorced you. With that attitude, no one could stand you." Mom's response was to pick up the cleaver by her foot. The mover ran away, humiliated, and my mom got a reputation as the toughest woman in the neighborhood. After the argument, Mom knelt down, angrily tidying up the things in the burlap sack. Even though she won the argument, how could she not be upset about what happened? I pulled out a small handkerchief from my backpack and calmly went over to wipe her sweat. Mom tilted her head, waiting for me to finish. Then she touched her forehead to my face, praising me endlessly. "Our Justin is so good. He even knows to help wipe Mom's sweat." "Mom," I touched her face and said seriously, "You're so pretty, you can't get upset. It'll make you age." Mom froze for a bit and then hugged me tight, giving me a few kisses. "Justin is right." She was so delighted by my words. She instantly forgot the unpleasantness before. Why should I get mad at someone like that? It's not worth aging over. Then she stood up. With me in one arm and the burlap sack in the other, she walked with her head held high to our new home on the 2nd floor. "Let's go home. I'll make braised pork for Justin." As I hugged Mom's neck tightly, I sensed something and glanced up through the gaps in the stairs. A furry little head quickly ducked out of sight. Our new home was almost empty. Mom brought a bed and a wardrobe, a table and some chairs, and even packed lots of useless knickknacks. But in that burlap sack, there wasn't any salt for cooking. The pork was already in the pot, and the stove couldn't be left unattended. After washing her hands, Mom put a big red apple in my arms and patted my shoulder. "Justin, go next door and borrow some salt for Mom." I nodded and went to knock on the neighbor's door. The one who opened the door was a pale and gentle-looking woman. The little girl who had been secretly watching us was standing behind her, staring at me. I held up the apple and smiled at her. "Annie, we just moved in next door. Can I borrow some salt? I'll trade you this apple." Bella's mom hesitated a bit, looking flustered. Oh, okay." She turned to the kitchen and came back with a full bowl of salt. But she absolutely refused to take my apple. "It's just a bit of salt. No need to be so formal." "Auntie, if I hold the apple, I won't have a hand free for the salt bowl." Still holding the apple, I didn't take the salt. My mom doesn't like troubling others. "Please just take it." Unable to do anything else, Bella's mom took the apple. She handed it to Bella and gently patted her head. "Bella, say thank you." Bella looked at her mom and then at me. "Thank you." Holding the salt bowl, I said goodbye. "Auntie, I'll bring the bowl back shortly." Mom was the one who eventually returned the salt bowl. Because of this little event, she and Bella's mom gradually became friends. After learning Bella and I were to attend the same first-grade class at the same school, they became even closer. Bella's mom was delighted. Bella, not so much. Her attitude toward me was strange. She'd secretly observe me, with a look that wasn't hateful, but not quite friendly either. But that was okay. I didn't like her either. I liked Mom the most. September came quickly, and Bella and I ended up in the same class. Kids are naturally drawn to beauty. Bella was pretty, and all the kids liked to gather around her. But more than her looks, her most noticeable feature was her poor grades. Even her combined scores in language arts and math couldn't scrape up to 80. Bella didn't care about studying. Her face and pocket money were her main attractions, so basically, if she wanted, everyone in class could be her playmate. Except me. When raising a child, love is more critical than money. Mom gave me tons of love, and as a result, I grew up to be a stable and emotionally healthy kid. I didn't care how pretty Bella was. It didn't matter to me. In my eyes, she was a regular classmate. Not impressive or special. Maybe because she was used to everyone fawning over her, my indifference stuck out to Bella. One day after school, she confronted me in line, and the first thing she said was, "Justin, your mom is so fierce. Everyone in the neighborhood says your mom's a shrew." Bella instinctively thought that my mother's fierceness was something she could use against me. There was a bit of naive and unintentional malice in her eyes. Back then, I just thought she was rude. As I grew up, I understood the deeper issue. Even at 7, Bella had already begun to accept certain societal misconceptions. A woman protecting her rights softly to earn sympathy is acceptable. But being firm and loud while fighting for herself is frowned upon. The words she said had a hint of disrespect. If it were any other kid, they probably would have hung their head in shame. But too bad. She was dealing with me. Growing up with my mom, I've seen my share of bad people way worse than Bella. So I've picked up a few arguing tricks. Like, with a rude kid, don't defend my mom saying she's not a nag. You gotta fight fire with fire. I blinked, quickly coming up with a response. "Bella, everyone in the neighborhood says your dad ran off with another woman. He doesn't want you anymore." It would have been more effective to talk about Bella's mom. But I remembered the time she lent us some salt, so I went easy and chose her dad. That's not true. Obviously, I hit a sore spot. Bella glared at me. My dad didn't leave me. My mom says he's just too busy working to come home and see us. I looked at her and gave a nonchalant "oh." Bella froze. Maybe my attitude made her realize that I, like my mom, am not to be messed with. When I didn't give her respect, she started respecting me. The next morning, Bella apologized to me. I kept walking, glanced her way, and gave a casual nod, accepting it. She followed behind, asking dejectedly. I said, "Sorry, so why won't you play with me?" I stopped, thought for a second, and honestly told her, "You can't even spell your own name right. I don't really like playing with dumb people." Bella's eyes widened, looking hurt. This was probably the first time she'd been rejected so clearly. The more you can't have something, the more you want it. She tugged on my backpack strap, stubbornly seeking an answer. "Justin, if I get smarter, will you play with me then?" A little annoyed, I casually replied, "Maybe." Those 3 words seemed to have some huge power. From that day on, Bella suddenly got serious about studying. And from then, she stuck by me and started calling me Justin. My mom is a woman who's not afraid to take risks. Right after graduating elementary school, she dared to go work far from home with her friends. As a hardworking and honest country girl, she experienced life's hardships early on. Working in a garment factory, she saved every penny. After payday, she kept only a little for herself and sent the rest home. My grandparents were thrilled to have a daughter who could earn money and support the family and even help pay her brother's bride price. When she was 20, my uncle needed to marry, so they arranged for my mom to wed a crippled man, who was my biological father. He wasn't born with a limp. It happened because he messed up an injury when he was a kid. Grandpa told Mom the man's family was well off, and he looked fine other than the limp and being a bit old. He warned her against being picky. Grandma kept her mouth shut and just cried. They'd already taken the bride price from the man's family, so Mom reluctantly agreed to the marriage. My birth father was a quiet, awkward guy, but he loved drinking and got violent when he did. Right after marrying him, Mom often had bruises all over, and everyone just told her to endure it. After having me, the abuse escalated, even before my mom could heal. Divorce wasn't even a concept out there in the mountains, and no one would help. My mom almost resigned to her fate, but my crying made her determined to leave. When I was 5 months old, my father snapped and knocked me to the ground, leaving a bleeding gash on my forehead. From that day, everything changed for my mom. Since my dad didn't agree to divorce, she went to the market and bought a bunch of pesticides and laid them out at home. She would stand over him with an axe at night. Her family refused the divorce too, so she went over with a kitchen knife and smashed up their house. Everyone said she was crazy, but she was incredibly clear-headed. She knew my father's promises and apologies were meaningless, and her family pushing her into this mess made them hypocrites. They weren't really a husband or family but buyers and sellers, and she was a traded object. Women at the bottom have two choices: endure or escape. Riddled with neither patience nor resolve, my mom chose to escape, letting herself be labeled as a crazy shrew. In losing her value as a wife and a mother, she finally found true freedom. That night, Mom carried me over mountains and mountains. She was both brave and clear-headed. If I can face life's challenges boldly, my mom's surely the source of all my courage. Bella's mom, though, is kind but almost too soft. When people talked about my mom behind her back, Bella's mom gently defended her. But when faced with her husband's cheating and long, cold treatment, she stayed silent and tolerated it. In fairness, Bella wasn't really a bad kid growing up. She was just spoiled, self-centered. But around me, none of her little tantrums mattered. The truth was, I was even more self-centered. Most boys are taught from birth to think of others, but my mom said my feelings were what mattered most and to never bend over backwards for others' expectations. So anyone who hindered me, I let go of. Bella couldn't understand why I always asked her to leave, or why I was never soft with her. All she could do was persistently follow me around, always trying to sit next to me in class. I was always cool, never as warm to her as she was to me. At first, Bella would get a bit upset, but maybe after so many rejections, she learned to ignore my indifference. She'd light up, eager to help carry my backpack and water bottle, and insist on walking to and from school with me. On the way home, she would talk on, though if I frowned, she'd immediately apologize and stop. "Sorry, Justin," she'd say, looking at me with anxious, apologetic eyes. "Am I annoying you again?" I'd calmly stretch out my hand for my stuff, telling her, "I never asked you to do any of this, Bella. We're just classmates. You don't need to curry favor with me." Bella swiftly dodged, grinning at me. I know, I insisted on doing it this way myself. The school isn't far from home, and my backpack isn't heavy." I stuffed my hands in my pockets, tossed a casual whatever you want of the wind, and headed home. Bella trailed right behind me step by step, for years. On the day we graduated elementary school, Bella wrote earnestly in every autograph book, "Justin is my best friend." When we started middle school, Bella was still my desk mate. Her dad made some money and was rarely home after that, spending most of his time with another woman across town. But he was always generous with Bella. In 2006, when we entered the 8th grade, Bella got her own computer. Back then, virtual pets were all the rage. Once the computer was online, Bella quickly applied for 2 accounts. Thrilled, she ran over to me, eager to share her accomplishment. Justin, I got you an account." She showed me a slip of paper with 2 sets of numbers, her eyes full of joy. "I adopted a little penguin for you. It's a girl with a bow. You can feed her, bathe her, play with her, and even make her go to school or work." I glanced at the slip while scribbling on some worksheets, then looked down to keep solving problems on my scratch paper. "Thanks, but I don't really need this." For me, finishing at the top of the class was more appealing. "I knew you were busy." Bella looked at me pitifully, her tone slightly drawn out, almost like she was pouting. "I'll take care of her. I'll level up your account until you need it. How about that?" I didn't look up, just tossed out another whatever response. Bella took it as a yes, a small dimple forming on her left cheek, her smile carrying that unique sincerity and brightness only a young girl can have. Afraid I might change my mind, she didn't linger long before she left, leaving the slip behind. After finishing my worksheets, I picked up the slip and stared at those 2 sets of numbers for a while. I tucked it into my notebook, shelved it, and opened my workbook to keep working on problems. And Bella kept her word. She ran my account continually and took care of that little penguin. Whenever we added classmates as friends, she always had them add me first, then herself. Honestly, that account didn't mean much to me. Still, Bella managed it enthusiastically. While she didn't post updates for me, she handled everything else. Her own account stayed basic, just for chatting with friends and letting her pet play with mine. Near the end of middle school, Bella got a cell phone. During night study periods, someone from another class somehow added me on the account. Claiming urgent business, they asked Bella if I wanted to be their boyfriend once they were approved. Bella was furious. She skipped the rest of night study and stormed off to start a fight. It was total chaos. Scared classmates fetched a teacher, leading to both students getting taken to the office. Parents called in. Inside, Bella refused to explain the fight, and the other girl, too embarrassed, kept silent as well. The teacher concluded they fought because they didn't like each other. Luckily, no one was hurt, so they only got assigned a 2,000-word reflection each. But I had a hunch it was about me. It wasn't vanity, just knowing Bella's a bit of a dummy. She wanted to stay in class with me and continue as desk mates. But she wasn't the brightest, so studying already took up most of her attention. She had no time for unsavory types or conflicts. "I'm not that stupid," Bella yelled, denying my words. She poked at the bruise on her mouth, wincing slightly. "It wasn't because of you, don't think so much, okay?" I watched her quietly, saying nothing. Bella, unable to take my silence, confessed everything. Defeated, she said, "You can yell at me. Really not that bright. Or does she think I'm such a confused person?" I turned away, opening my book to a fresh page, and calmly said, "He doesn't matter to me and has no effect on me. Don't fight over stuff like this." Bella sheepishly admitted she understood. I replied with a simple focusing back on my book. Bella leaned in again, softly asking, "Justin, could you not like someone else?" It was a dull, pointless question. I ignored her. Still, she mumbled, "You're Justin. You're meant to beat all the test monsters, always be first. You can't start dating already, right?" Feeling speechless, I shuffled away slightly. Bella was finally satisfied. "That's more like it." She nodded, returning to her desk to write her reflection, mumbling, "Justin, first in class. Justin, first in grade. Justin, #1 in the world." I shook my head. Such a dummy. As the summer waned, Bella and I entered high school. Her voice and appearance matured, full of youthful boldness. She changed a lot from our younger days. What stayed the same was how she still hung around me like before. "Justin, Justin," she often begged from her desk, "will you watch my game during fourth period P.E.? Please?" I coolly refused, no time. Seeing me unmoved, Bella would trudge away. A guy in the front row noticed and couldn't help saying, "Wow, Justin, Bella's begging you like that and you're still so unfazed. Is this childhood friend confidence or what?" Then he asked, curious, "Justin, do you really not feel a thing?" My hand paused, holding the book. At that age, everyone's discovering crushes and attraction. Bella was pretty, did well in school, and her good family background added to her charm. Since the start of high school, her desk was never short of love letters. Many students liked her, no doubt about it. But Bella didn't seem to care at all. Day after day, she was always around me, carrying my backpack, going to and from school with me. In all her plans, I was always the priority. With a girl who's all about me, I have to ask myself, was I really not moved? I'm not a robot. No one can turn down such passionate preference, and I'm no exception. At that time, Bella was genuine. Her affection for me was as pure as crystal. But I was also very clear about what I wanted and what I needed to focus on. So I left it all to time. Time decides who you meet in life, your heart decides who you want in your life, and your actions decide who stays. The day Bella moved away, I went to say goodbye. It was July, and the girl was full of sorrow and reluctance. She couldn't help but cry her heart out under the Indian tree. For once, I was patient, reassuring her gently. "It's okay. It's not like we won't see each other again. But it's different," Bella said, rubbing her red eyes and looking at me pitifully. Once I move, we won't see each other as much. Hearing that, I couldn't quite pinpoint my feelings. In that moment, it was like a gentle pluck on my heartstrings, or a tiny ant crawling over, leaving a subtle, undeniable itch. How could that be? I smiled slightly, my voice barely a whisper. Bella, we're still so young. There's still a long, long future ahead. Bella was even more upset, murmuring, I don't want to leave you, Justin. I don't want to move at all. You'll get so annoyed with me that you'll forget all about me. I won't forget you. Bella was always persistent, so I got used to it. I promised her we'd see the Indian tree blossom in the fall, and you know me, I keep my promises. Hearing that, Bella finally relaxed. Her black car had been waiting for a while. After pouring out her feelings, it was time for her to go. The breeze was gentle, cicadas buzzed in my ears. I stood under the Indian tree, watching the girl leave, not expecting it would be our last meeting. When I saw Bella again, she was completely different. Sensitive, gloomy, violent, and anxious. Drinking, smoking, street racing, fighting. The girl Summer took away under the Indian tree was not the one fall returned to me. At the start of our junior year, Bella dyed her hair. She moved her seat to the corner of the classroom. She wouldn't dress properly. She wouldn't listen in class. She'd sleep as soon as class started. In a few days, she even stopped showing up. The homeroom teacher was furious but couldn't do anything. Bella's dad made a lot of money in business. He even donated the new building at school. I don't have a penchant or mission for saving others. But Bella was an exception. I couldn't just watch her fall apart. I couldn't believe the clumsy, sincere girl had turned bad for no reason. I wanted to give her a hand. The first time I skipped class, it was for Bella. With my backpack on, I walked through countless dazzling neon lights. I found Bella at the nightclub entrance, leaning indifferently against a bike, cigarette in hand. Seeing me, she instinctively put it out, as if she'd done it 1,000 times before. We stared at each other from across the street for a moment. Bella walked over to me. The moment she stood in front of me, she seemed uneasy, like a child. I looked at her quietly. Her jawline had lost its roundness, now sharp and refined. I blinked, gently saying, Bella, you've lost weight. Her fingertips trembled, and she lowered her head, embarrassed. I studied her face, her expression. After a while, I continued, you've not been yourself lately. Something must have happened that I don't know about for you to change like this. I thought about getting the story from others, like asking the teachers, or maybe checking out where she lives now. But after thinking it over, I wanted to hear it from her. Bella, I'm really worried about you. No sooner had I finished than Bella's tears started falling. She looked up at me, her sobs choked with grief. She could barely get the words out. My mom's gone, Justin. My mom's gone. Hearing this news, I was momentarily at a loss. Then came a strong sense of disbelief. That sweet, timid lady, how could she just be gone? I felt dazed. Just 2 months ago, she was softly waving goodbye to me, saying she'd invite me over once they were settled in. Just 2 months, it had only been 2 months. I opened my mouth, but words failed me. Losing a loved one is a sudden storm, but also a lifelong dampness. Losing a mother is arguably one of the most painful things in the world. No wonder Bella had changed so much. Words of comfort felt too inadequate. I took a step forward, opening my arms to her. Bella hugged me back, her hot tears falling onto my neck. He lied to us. He made us move just to force her to divorce. She sobbed onto my shoulder, her voice raspy, like it was mixed with fine dust. I thought he changed, that he really changed. So I listened and went to the summer camp. But none of you were there. No one was there to help Mom. My mom, the bridge was so high, the water so deep and fast. How hopeless she must have felt to jump. Wrapped in regret and remorse, thoughts of her mother almost suffocated her. I gently patted her back, softly reassuring her. It will pass, Bella. Things will get better. No, Justin, they won't. Bella wiped her tears, standing tall, her eyes filled with deep hatred. I want revenge. I want him to regret everything he did to my mom. But Bella, it's not worth breaking a diamond to shatter a stone. Don't destroy yourself to get back at him. I held out my hand to her, seriously saying, I know it might be tough ahead, but we can walk it together. Bella, let's give it a try, okay? Bella looked at my hand, stayed silent for a long time, but ultimately refused. I can't do it. She stepped back a few steps, red-eyed, looking at me. Justin, I can't go back to being the old Bella anymore. I don't have a mom now. I didn't even get to see her for the last time. He has to pay even if the price is my own. The girl spoke fiercely, consumed by hatred that swallowed her reason, leaving only endless anger and resentment. I watched her quietly. Overcoming pain is so difficult. Compared to that, it's much easier to fall. Bella chose to drown in it. She didn't want to come out. Saying I'm not disappointed would be a lie. I instinctively felt she shouldn't be like this, but her fate wasn't mine to decide. I didn't have the ability or responsibility to shoulder her life. Maybe I am, as they say, cold and rational. Bella didn't reach for my hand, so letting her go only took me a minute. You know what kind of person I am, right? Grabbing my backpack straps, my voice was barely a whisper. Bella, the road ahead is yours to walk alone. With that, I slowly turned and walked back the way I came. Bella stood behind me. This time, it was her watching me go. At 17, Bella and I made different choices. I tried, so my conscience is clear. The bluebird and the fish don't swim the same path. The journey ahead is unknown and long, and with time so short, I won't wait for her. After that day, Bella and I fell back to just being ordinary classmates. She no longer followed me around, and I stopped interfering in her affairs. Parting ways with mutual understanding, ensuring each other's well-being, is one way to interact. I still sat in class studying, while she skipped class, got into fights, hung out with her rowdy friends, smoking and drinking to numb herself under the guise of escaping sadness. Later, Bella started dating handsome boys from school. She was generous, with flowers and grand gestures always present. I calmly watched her dig herself deeper, then continued focusing on what I needed to do. Her first boyfriend once came to the classroom door, not looking friendly. After Bella found out, she was furious and blamed him for bothering me, promptly breaking up with him. Afterwards, her boyfriends were always well-behaved, mindful not to be curious about me, not to trouble me. During that time, classmates gave me strange looks. Justin, you really are so cold, said a boy in the front row, holding his face in awe. But Bella really cares about you. I'm not a monk in a temple, nor a god in the Bible. I'm just an ordinary person. So how could I not feel a pang of sadness when I saw Bella hugging and kissing someone else on the street? But my sadness wasn't about her kissing another guy. It was finally knowing that the girl standing under that tree would never be back. The way Bella handed over money after kissing was so glaring. She didn't respect them. Without respect, there can be no love. Those wild pursuits of Bella's are, to me, like a child rolling around for toys. She wants the toy, gets it, tires of it, and then looks forward to the next. As for me, I'm the one thing she always wanted but never had. They say I'm her unreachable dream. But actually, I'm just the vessel for her fantasies, her excuse to hurt innocent boys. In the not-too-distant future, I might also be her excuse for messing up her life. I know the path I should walk. I will never become someone's appendage. I will only be myself. I don't cling to being loved. In fact, I'm the creator of love. But Bella doesn't seem to understand. She rejected me, yet never fully accepted my withdrawal. She was angry, vexed, trying to get my attention, only to find me indifferent to her immature attempts. Did she have to accept the fact that I had truly let go? Starting senior year, Bella voluntarily transferred to a regular class. To ensure quality graduation rates, the school implemented an exam-based elimination system. The first month's test results placed the top 50 students in a new, smaller class. Actually, there wasn't much change. Class A was already the best experimental class, so the same people stayed. Looking around, the faces remained familiar except for Calvin. Calvin was particularly hard-working. Living up to the phrase oblivious to the outside world, focused solely on learning, it described him perfectly. Perhaps it was fate, but Calvin became my new desk mate. I wasn't one to be warm, and he was quiet and introverted. That led to us keeping a distance for a long time after school started. What I saw most during recess was him in his faded clothes, stubbornly pursing his lips, hunched over his desk diligently working on problems. Calvin seemed to never tire, or perhaps he simply didn't dare to. Sitting beside such a hard-working person, I was inevitably influenced. I subconsciously accelerated my own progress too. Getting to know Calvin happened at the end of November. That morning, the school announced a meeting for the seniors. With classes canceled, everyone was chatting happily as they headed downstairs. Calvin, however, was sitting with his head down, motionless in his seat. As I packed my pencil case, I inadvertently noticed his clenched, pale hands under the desk. The teacher was loudly urging us from the doorway, and there were fewer and fewer people in the classroom until it was just Calvin and me. "What's going on with you two?" The teacher, in a rush, frowned and came over. "Justin, you have an award to receive. If you don't go down now, you'll be late." Putting my pencil case down, I leaned against the desk and said weakly, "Teacher, I don't feel well." The homeroom teacher immediately looked worried. "What's wrong?" "Low blood sugar, same old problem." I shook my head feebly, asking to stay in the classroom to rest. "Teacher, can Calvin stay with me? I'm afraid of passing out." The teacher checked the time and nodded after a brief moment. "Justin, stay in the classroom and rest. Calvin, keep an eye on Justin, and if anything happens, come find me immediately." After talking, he left, still not completely reassured. Being a good student definitely has its perks. Lying to a teacher without being questioned is one of them. Calvin blushed and looked at me, apologizing. "Sorry, Justin, I'm not feeling too well." "It's all right," I said, standing up to let him sit back down. "He just needed to rest a bit." Calvin nodded, his face still red. He glanced at me, still looking a bit embarrassed. Calmly, I pushed the hot water I had prepared over to his desk. Without looking up, I flipped through the newly distributed English materials and said, "You should deal with problems as they come. No need to feel ashamed." Calvin didn't say anything, but he did seem more at ease. After a while, he quietly said, "Justin, you're really great." I glanced at him briefly before quickly looking away. The motivational assembly lasted just over an hour before it ended, and everyone gradually returned to the classroom. A male classmate from the front row handed me my award certificate. He looked at me with concern and said, "He mentioned you're not feeling well. Are you better now, Justin?" I accepted the certificate and shook my head. "I'm all right now, thanks. By the way, Bella's looking at you." He winked at me and indicated for me to look outside the classroom, immediately waving his hands defensively. "I swear I'm not on Bella's side. Just letting you know because she looked worried earlier." "I got it." Just then, the bell rang for class. I kindly reminded him, "It's your dad's class, and you haven't finished that worksheet." The front row groaned and resignedly went back to their seat. Bella was still standing outside the classroom, but I'd already started checking the wrong answers on my test. I didn't look at her the whole time. The next day, Calvin spent the entire morning sneaking glances at me, hesitating to speak until the afternoon when school was let out. Finally, he gathered the courage to invite me over for a meal at his house. "I told my grandma about yesterday," Calvin said nervously, clutching his shirt. "She said to bring you home so she can make something special. It's a holiday today, Justin. Would you like to come to my house?" His voice was cautious, as if afraid I might decline. I thought about it and stood up, slinging my backpack on. After taking a few steps, I noticed Calvin wasn't following. Turning back, I said, "Come on, aren't you inviting me to eat?" My tone carried a hint of a smile, and Calvin looked at me in surprise. Once he realized I was serious, his face broke into a joyful, shy grin. After calling my mom at the school gate, I casually asked him how far his house was from school. Calvin nodded honestly, "It's a bit far. Our school had a cafeteria but no dorms," making me frown. "How do you get to and from school every day?" I asked. "By walking," Calvin said, looking at me with a somewhat goofy smile. "Sometimes I run." Glancing at my watch, I noticed we still had plenty of time. All right, I replied, tightening my backpack straps. Lead the way. I'll walk with you, it can be my exercise for the day. He nodded happily and off we went. Along the way, Calvin chattered animatedly. Through our conversation, I learned he and my mom had both come from the mountains. Calvin shared some traits with my mom: simplicity, kindness, and resilience. This made me start to like him. I also realized that he wasn't really shy. It's just that no one wanted to hang out with him, partly due to his family background. This made him hesitant to approach others. Calvin told me I was the fourth person to be nice to him. The first was his grandma, the second was his elementary school teacher, and the third was a kind person who sponsored his high school education. Justin, you're really good to me, he said. The way Calvin said it made it seem like I'd done something big, but all I'd really done was offer him a tissue. But when I saw the old, run-down house at the city's edge and the elderly woman waiting outside, I suddenly understood why he felt that way. He'd received so little kindness and love from the world that he cherished every bit of it. Calvin's grandma patted my head and went to pick some peppers from the garden. Meanwhile, Calvin brought out a small stool, and we sat under the leaky rooftop. My grandma is mute, he said. In just a few words, he sketched out the past. 36 years ago, a 19-year-old girl boarded a train to the countryside. During a stop, she went to the restroom. The blow to her head came out of nowhere, and when she awoke, strangers had sold her to a remote mountain village. There, she had a husband 20 years her senior. That was how one young urban woman disappeared, replaced by a mute woman who lost her tongue in an assault, and 3 of her fingers to her abusive husband. Don't worry, Justin. My grandma doesn't hurt people, Calvin hastily explained. The man died long ago. She found me by the river. After that, she got much better and only sometimes sees things that aren't there. Don't be scared of her. I wasn't scared. I just felt sad. A woman who was broken both mentally and physically, raising a child, sending him to school, and eventually escaping the mountains. It's hard to fathom the struggle. Calvin said when he was young, his grandma wrote in Russian and even taught him to play piano on a keyboard drawn in mud. I can't imagine what his life would have been. We talked about a lot of things that afternoon. Calvin's grandma cooked minced meat with eggs and tiger skin peppers. It was a rare feast for them, but my bowl was heaped with food. I cleaned my plate, making grandma exceedingly happy. She gestured wildly with her hands, trying to express, as a confused noise came from her throat. Calvin laughed and interpreted, "Grandma says you eat well. You're a good kid." I felt a lump in my throat but struggled with what to say. From escaping the mountains, to grandma's crippled fingers, to Calvin abandoned by the river, to the damp, dark house, to scavenged incomes, to high school tuition, to meager food supplies, to second-hand clothes. All these realities I'd never known turned up starkly in front of me. Later, when Calvin was taking me home, Grandma called us back. She kneeled down with her slow-moving body and groped under the bed for quite a while. Finally, she pulled out a rusty can of milk powder and took out 2 crumpled bills, handing one to Calvin and one to me. She pointed at her mouth, smiling at us, saying, "Be good. Grandma's giving you money for some treats." A lump formed in my chest as a faint bitterness spread from my fingertips to the pit of my stomach. After I got home that day, I thought about it for a long time. When dealing with people, I never assume I'm a good person, but for the first time, the struggles of women at the bottom were made real to me. I couldn't ignore it. Calvin is like a little fish stranded in the desert. I don't have the power to put him back in the ocean, but the least I can do is sprinkle some water to quench his thirst. I am acutely aware of how vast the desert is, and a few drops of water won't ease his thirst. But that little fish cares, and so do I. There's a small market downstairs from my place, run by a nice lady. Every time I buy something, I go to her, and this time was no different. I was standing indecisively in front of the narrow shelves when she came over. Learning that I needed to buy some daily necessities, she helped me select them, and most importantly, they were almost half what they'd usually cost. I bought enough for 2 and brought it home, planning to take it to school the next day, but my mom saw it when she came home at night. During dinner, she kept looking at me. "Justin, is your pocket money not enough lately?" I shook my head. No, it's fine. Looking at the stuff on the couch, I immediately guessed why she asked. When I was young, my mom took me everywhere, making a living by selling clothes at street stalls. We didn't even have a decent place to stay until we moved to the neighborhood where Bella's family lived, and things finally settled down. Back then, she was willing to spend on me. As we gradually moved from street stalls to shops and later to storefronts, and money became less of an issue, she was even more generous with me. Love often feels indebted. Mom got used to giving me the best within her means, so when she saw that bag of cheap necessities, her first reaction was to worry I didn't have enough money. So, to ease her mind, I told her the whole story. I can't buy the expensive brands, Mom. Calvin wouldn't accept them. He's very considerate, and I don't want him to feel burdened. Plus, I'm mindful of how hard you work for money. Justin. Mom said my name with a satisfied tone, looking at me with glowing eyes. Sometimes I wonder how you turned out so well. The answer to her question was her, of course. I watched how she loved me growing up, so I learned how to be kind to people. Calvin, he's a good person. He deserves love and kindness. Early the next morning, I carried a pink paper bag to school. When I got to the classroom, Calvin was already at his desk, studying. Seeing me, his eyes lit up. Morning, Justin. Morning. I took off my backpack and handed him the paper bag. I thought you might need this. Calvin awkwardly accepted it, hesitating before looking inside. First of all, I start before he could say anything. Calvin, this isn't pity or charity. It's mutual assistance between us. If accepting it makes you uneasy, then how about inviting me to your place for lunch once a month? After saying that, I didn't forget to make a cheeky request. I don't like meat. Next time I come over, can Grandma make scrambled eggs with tomatoes? Calvin held the bag, staring at me, eyes filling with tears, but he didn't cry. Blinking them back, Calvin whispered, "Thank you, Justin." No need to thank me, Calvin. If it helps you, it's my pleasure. Once we got used to each other, Calvin became quite chatty. In our breaks after finishing exercises, he would talk to me about everything, from everyday musings to the mysteries of the universe and the future. Dressed in simple, worn clothes, Calvin gazed at the vast galaxy, cheerfully sharing his knowledge of astronomy. To me, he was like a young tree growing in a barren starfield. I'd bet on him becoming the best astronomer out there. But Calvin only wanted to be an adult who could earn money, live in a solid house, eat tasty food, and take Grandma out to enjoy herself. His dream was simple yet realistic, just what he desperately needed at that time. He said, "Justin, I wish I could be as good as you." That's not true, Calvin. I shook my head, challenging his words. I'm not great because I'm super talented or hardworking. It's more because I'm lucky. I had the privilege of a good education early on, with an environment pushing me forward, whereas your journey has been tough. From the mountains to the town, then to the city, any mistake could mean you miss out on education. Calvin looked at me wide-eyed. Our starting points were so far apart, yet here we are, sitting side by side. You know what that means? It means you've beaten the odds with your strong abilities. My achievements relied on many preconditions, while Calvin's were hard-won through sweat and determination. I couldn't fathom how many times he stumbled or how much hardship he'd endured on his way here. Suffering isn't something to glorify, but Calvin sure is. I looked at him earnestly, with unwavering confidence. Calvin, you're an incredibly amazing guy. Calvin hesitated with disbelief. Really? Of course, it's true, I nodded confidently. Don't you believe me? Calvin quickly shook his head. I definitely believe you. Calvin, who believed in me, celebrated his birthday on the last day of school before winter break. He said his birthday was the day Grandma found him because that's when his life truly started. That afternoon, after making him work through practice papers for a long time, we headed downstairs together once most people had left. I stopped at the school gate and made an excuse, asking him to sit on the bench at the bus stop and wait for me. Make sure you watch the backpacks for me. I'll be right back. Calvin clutched those two backpacks tightly, nodding seriously with the kind of posture you'd see from a little kid in kindergarten. I chuckled and turned to head to the dessert shop nearby. While waiting in line at the dessert shop, I watched through the glass window. Calvin was still sitting there without moving, just like before. He looked a bit silly. Carrying a palm-sized tiramisu, I walked back to him. I placed a small candle from the shop assistant on top. "Calvin, happy birthday," I said with a smile. But Calvin started to cry. Through tears, he explained, "Justin, I don't really cry much. I know. It's just turning 18 without a little cake is a bit silly, don't you think?" Calvin sniffled, closed his eyes, and made a wish. "People need love. Love gives you courage to face anything, and it's a pure, warm thing." I created love, and Calvin felt it. He slowly ate that tiny cake, savoring every bite. As we said our goodbyes, I hugged Calvin. "Calvin, someday you're going to try any food you want, go wherever you want, and become the amazing adult you dream of being. You believe me, right?" Calvin leaned on my shoulder and nodded softly. "I believe." In the setting sun, I watched Calvin leave, his steps steady and firm, leaving me with just a lean silhouette. When I turned around, I saw Bella standing there behind a tree. We hadn't seen each other in ages. Her features seemed even more refined, deep eyes and a straight nose. There was a beauty wavering between girlhood and adulthood, mixed with confusion and a touch of decadence. Bella is beautiful, but it's just that, only beautiful. We locked eyes for a moment, and then Bella slowly walked over. Standing in front of me, she looked me in the eye with a bittersweet expression. "Justin, I regret it." I looked at her quietly, without responding. "If only I had held your hand back then," she started, eyes brimming with tears. "Then the person receiving your care and love should have been me, not him." I frowned, warning her, "Bella, don't mess with him." Bella had already become someone I didn't want to associate with, but Calvin was a good kid, and as a fellow young person, I had to think about him. The bus came wobbling to the stop, and I grabbed my backpack and headed straight onto it. As for Bella, I figured there wasn't much left to say. As a senior in high school, our breaks are short, and soon enough it's back to school. But right before going back, I ended up with a broken leg from a sudden car accident. The surgery was done by the end of February, barely getting me ready for the June exams. I had to stay home and study those last 3 months since healing takes time. Calvin came with some classmates to visit me, but with exams looming, they had to leave soon after. I called Calvin back, my leg's busted, so I'm stuck home until the exams. I handed him the backpack by my bed, packed with enough practice questions for 3 months. I added, "I can't visit Grandma, so tell her I'll be back for her tomato scrambled eggs when I'm all healed." Calvin bit his lip, paused halfway through saying he could bring them in a container. Suddenly, he remembered his family had no containers. Smiling slightly, I reassured him later is fine. "Calvin, you just focus on studying right now. By the way, do you know Bella? If she pesters you, just ignore her, because she's trouble. Understand?" He nodded furiously with the backpack in hand. "Don't worry, Justin, I know." Once I made sure everything was covered, I let Calvin go. Just before leaving, Calvin looked at me with reluctance. "Justin, get better soon. After the exams, I'll learn how to make tomato scrambled eggs from Grandma." I nodded, waved him off to hurry back to class. Calvin smiled, carrying my backpack as he walked away. I once thought that moments of farewell would be grand, with tearful, tight hugs for the last meeting. But when it actually happened, I realized it was just an ordinary afternoon. Calvin waved, both of us assuming it was a simple goodbye. Unknowingly, it was farewell forever. In those missed months, I had a blank of what Calvin went through. Eventually, from others, I pieced the story together. Grandma got sick, really sick. Bella offered Calvin money if he'd be her boyfriend. Wanting to help Grandma, he agreed. That's where the nightmare began. First, Bella forbade him from seeing me, then led him into skipping school and reckless driving. Despite this, Calvin's studies remained solid. The real blow was when someone saw Bella give him money, sparking rumors at school. It didn't matter if it was true or not once rumors started that a guy was living off a girl. The words cut deep, almost breaking Calvin. But he held strong. What really shattered him was something else entirely. The day before exams, his grandma passed away. Her lungs were shot, and it eventually became too much to treat. Her health deteriorated beyond saving, and she passed right in front of Calvin after years of holding on. All this I was oblivious to. Exiting the exam hall on crutches, I was gleeful, thinking Calvin was closer to the future he wanted. I thought I'd visit Grandma once I was healed, and perhaps Calvin would drop by once he was free. But that wait lasted until the day exam results came out. My mom went with me to the internet cafe to check my exam scores. When we found out I got the score I wanted, she held me and cried for a long time. After calming down, she gathered a few friends from the cafe and took me to a restaurant to celebrate properly. We got back pretty late that night. It was really dark outside, and the staircase light had been broken for a while. Talking and laughing with my mom, I didn't see the letter under the doormat. When I held that letter, limping to find him, it was already the next morning. The riverbank was crowded with onlookers, murmuring and expressing sympathy for a boy distressed over failing his college entrance exam. In a small boat floating on the water, a man stood at the back smoking, with a tin can quietly at his feet. Draped in thick black fabric inside the boat, a pale arm reached out, swollen with a red string tied around the wrist. That was Calvin. My stomach twisted with spasms. My body trembled. I opened my mouth, but no tears came. The one lying there was Calvin. Everyone moves forward without looking back, leaving the past behind. But a boy named Calvin stays trapped in that dark night. Losing his grandma took away his will to live, and failing the exam was the final straw. Guilt and despair engulfed him. He was so kind. He chose to end his life as a way to atone. Mud and silt filled his mouth and nose. An 18-year-old life lost at the cold river's bottom. When he left, he was clutching that old rusty tin can he once stashed under his bed. As a kid, it held Calvin's school fees. As he grew up, it held his grandma's ashes. So quietly he left. In those days of limited news, no one even knew he was gone. I held Calvin's letter with a heavy heart. This gentle, shy boy wrote with warmth, recalling how much I helped and cared for him. Not a trace of bitterness, only gratitude and relief. Calvin peacefully closed the chapter of his life. At the letter's end, he wished me well. Dear Justin, he wrote, don't stop because of me. May your road ahead be lit, your bridges strong, and the world open before you, leading you to wherever you want. You see, Calvin was such a good kid. His biggest dream was to grow up and rent a bright and spacious place to live safely with his grandma, without worrying about leaks. They would eat toast with a thick layer of peanut butter because Calvin thought that was the best thing ever. It's been so many years, and though I barely remember his face, just mentioning Calvin still brings overwhelming pain. Life isn't fair. Bella, you're to blame. Calvin's gone, and no one knows but me. What about Bella? She's planning her studies abroad. Her grades are too low for anything but a community college here. But she has a wealthy dad who's already set up a plane to the UK for her. Some drown in a river, some have bright futures. This isn't fair. Bella, you must learn a lesson. The day before her flight, I texted Bella, I'm waiting for you under the pagoda tree. New phone, new number. No name on the message, but Bella knows who sent it. I wasn't sure she'd come. People change. But I won the bet. Bella didn't bail. That evening, under the pagoda tree, she arrived. She walked towards me slowly as if doubting I was really there, trembled, and uttered, Justin? I looked up at the tall, lush pagoda tree. The flowers bloomed gloriously, just like 2 years ago when I never saw her in that early autumn. Such a shame. I'm not the same as before, nor is she the same girl. The sweet girl who cried not to break up is long gone. The pagoda tree bloomed. I sighed softly, Bella, stay. Bella looked at me in disbelief, confusion all over her face. Then slowly, tears of lost and regained joy filled her eyes. She covered her face and sobbed. That year, Bella and I were 18. She wanted tons of love, and I stood by the trap, watching her come to me. Bella didn't get on that plane to the UK. She fought with her dad fiercely, insisted on staying close to me. Her dad ended up in the hospital out of anger but eventually gave in. In September, Bella followed me to a city. Her college was ordinary but close to mine, just a half-hour ride away. At first, she often came to see me, proud that her boyfriend studied at the top university in the country. Later, she came less, saying, "Justin, will a girl from a junior college embarrass you?" I responded calmly, "No need for both of us to have high degrees at home." Maybe the word home struck her. Bella changed her ways. She stopped partying, quit drinking and smoking, deleted all boys' contacts from her phone. Once a pampered girl, she rolled up her sleeves, learned to cook for me. Everyone said Bella loved me. For 8 years, her world revolved around me. On her 26th birthday, she knelt on one knee in front of me, holding a ring symbolizing true love. "Marry her! Marry her!" Her friends cheered, casting blessings our way. But I remained silent. After a long pause, I said, "Bella, you once made an unforgivable mistake." Bella's face turned pale instantly. She quickly began to defend herself. "It was only once. Justin, I swear. Just that once. I was so drunk that I had no idea what happened. By the time I woke up, it was already done. I'm innocent. Justin, I know nothing about this." She said that and shot a furious look at the boy standing next to the pink balloons, a hint of madness in her voice. "Was it you? Did you say something to Justin?" The boy, tears streaming down his face, just shook his head. "I didn't." "Enough, it's not important." I interrupted the drama, looking coldly at the ring. "Bella, I don't care who you've been with." Bella stood frozen, staring at me in shock. "I'm talking about something else." I closed my eyes. The anger I'd held back for years finally erupted today. Grabbing her by the neck, I felt a cold fire ignite in my eyes. "Do you remember Calvin? Bella, do you remember him?" Bella looked at me blankly, as if trying to recall who Calvin was. It took a while before her eyes widened in sudden remembrance of the boy she used to bully and humiliate for money. "You do remember." My heart filled with sorrow. "Bella, do you know he's dead?" A sharp pain hit my heart, making me bend over, gasping for air. The tears I couldn't shed by the river years ago finally came rushing out today, 8 years later. Grandma's gone, and so is Calvin. He ended his life in the same way your mom did, on the day those college entrance exam results came out. Do you know how hard Calvin's grandma worked to survive in the city? Do you know how tough it was for Calvin to make it to his senior year? He pinned all his hopes on college entrance exams. Do you know how important that was to him? They barely escaped that mountain, but they did escape it. A bitter lump formed in my throat, leaving me speechless. In the end, all I could do was question Bella over and over. "I told you not to mess with him. Why didn't you listen? Why didn't you listen?" Bella's lip quivered as she kept saying sorry, hoping I would forgive her. But I just found it ridiculous. I wiped away my tears, looking at Bella with undisguised disgust. "The person you should apologize to is Calvin." "But Bella, Calvin is dead. What you did to him is unforgivable." "No, Justin." Bella shook her head frantically. "I didn't know any better back then, Justin. I didn't mean to cause his death." I'm sorry. She kept apologizing. But saying sorry is meaningless. Bella needs to pay a real price. I'll make sure she knows what Calvin went through. I'll let her know I once loved her, but it was just in the past. I'll show her how she's no different from the people she hates. These are the things I want to tell her. But you know what I won't tell her? I won't tell her that during her most precious years, when she should have been working hard, she wasted all her energy on shallow aspects of gender. For years, she's only cared about whether I loved her, if I replied to her messages, gradually turning herself into my appendage, a person just craving love in this relationship, naturally losing her potential to create meaningful value, develop a rich inner world, and maintain constant growth. We can't be young again. I looked down and glanced at Bella emotionlessly, suddenly laughing. See, I've slowly killed Bella's life, and she's completely clueless. This hidden murder of her progress is evident in how she's done nothing with her life over the years. When someone's intelligence and resources don't match, that wealth just finds its way back into the market. Bella's dad is gone. How long can Bella maintain her current lifestyle? To actually experience it is the true atonement. In the face of life, her pain means nothing. Her pride is worthless. If Bella dares to blame it all on Calvin, saying he couldn't resist temptation back then, then she's just paying the price for her own choices now. She never refused to jump into my trap. You stupid and wicked soul, how do you deserve love? In the end, I took the ring from Bella's hand and tossed it into the trash can beside us, coldly declaring, Bella, we're done. No, Justin, you can't do this. Bella clung to my waist, desperately trying to hold on. What should I do now? Justin, you've been my whole life for 19 of my 26 years. You're all I've got. That's your problem. I gently pushed her away with an icy smile. You know I'm not a good person. When I asked you to stay back then, it was just to get back at you. All for Calvin, nothing more. After breaking up with Bella, I started preparing for my PhD in Europe. I've spent years studying hard and doing experiments. My mom has been both furthering her studies and running her clothing store. When I was 21, she started her own brand. She'll be going to Europe with me this time. She's a designer, always had a special fondness for Paris, the fashion capital, and couldn't leave me behind. So she decided to venture across the ocean with me. As for Bella, I heard she started drinking heavily after we broke up, going back to her high school self. She's a mess now, but that's got nothing to do with me. I've said it before, I have no interest or calling in saving anyone. Bella is no exception. But it's because of you that she's like this. The boy who stood by the pink balloons cried out angrily at me, filled with both rage for my actions and compassion for Bella. Losing you really hurt her. We don't see eye to eye. I got up and opened the door. I don't welcome you here. Please leave. The boy walked out, dejected. I closed the door and sat on the couch for a while. Inside the open notebook in front of me was an old bill, with a note. Save it for something tasty from Grandma. I saw two smiling faces, one old and one young, and covered my face, suddenly overwhelmed with tears. You liar, I haven't even gotten to taste your tomato eggs yet. I set my leave for August. Before going, I visited the river from back then. Gray skyscrapers rose from concrete and steel, fences now lining the riverbank, forbidding entry. I stood on the bridge, facing the river from afar. A breeze blew through my hair as a vague voice echoed from the sky. Justin, you're the best. The boy who'd sat beside me back then seemed to still be bashfully smiling at me. Everyone's growing old, but he remains forever young, forever pure and beautiful. I gently placed the flowers at my feet, smiling with understanding. Life's road is long and tough. Dear Calvin, thank you for your blessings. Across the heavens and the earth, north and south, east and west, you are paths that will never meet again. Rivers and bridges, highways and roads, onwards I stride, forever bold.